I stopped loving the man who doubted me, but never the man before that.
Then let me become him again.
Don't promise me out of fear.
I'm terrified, just not of loving you. I lost you once. I won't lose you again.
Me too.
Starting right now and forever.
Do you want to be my father?
I already am.
For how long?
Take a second to subscribe so you won't miss more dramatic stories like this. Smoke rolled down the canyon faster than any engine could outrun it, and Clara Bennett was already running toward the command vehicle before the radio finished crackling. "Engine 4, pull back now," she ordered, her voice cutting through static. The fire jumped the canyon. "Another minute up there and you're trapped." When word came that hikers were still stranded on the trail, she rerouted the rescue helicopter without hesitation, brushing off every objection with 4 words. It is now. This was who Clara had become. 10 years of fire seasons had turned a soft-spoken schoolteacher into a woman who could hold 200 lives steady in one hand, because she'd learned long ago that panic spreads faster than flame, and if the commander broke, everyone behind her would break too. The firefighters who worked under her had a quiet nickname for her, the Steady One, earned through 11 fire seasons, where nobody had ever once heard her voice crack over the radio, no matter what the night demanded of her. 200 miles north, a television broadcast froze an entire boardroom. The anchor was talking about the Black Ridge wildfire threatening the Aspen Crest Resort. Nobody was listening to the anchor. Jonah Mercer was staring at the woman standing in front of the fire trucks. Ash streaked across her jacket, her voice steady while the world burned around her. 10 years disappeared in a single breath. When the board demanded a decision, Jonah stood instead, reaching for his coat. He was going to Black Ridge, not because it was safe, but because his company's project had put people in that fire's path, and because, for the first time in a decade, he had just seen the one person he'd never managed to forget. 6 hours later, at the barricades, a trooper blocked his path until Clara's voice cut through and told him it was fine. She walked toward him, carrying a folded map. Older, steadier, entirely changed. Neither of them smiled. "You've changed," he said. "So have you," she answered, and walked off before either of them could say more. That night, 12 construction workers were trapped near Ridge Trail with every road blocked or collapsed. Jonah offered an unapproved maintenance road he'd personally supervised, insisting he had checked every retaining wall himself, even though the road had never been officially approved. Clara's deputy balked at gambling lives on his memory. Clara didn't. She sent the team down that road, and 40 minutes later, all 12 workers were out alive. The first time in 10 years Jonah had managed to help instead of remembering how badly he'd once failed her. Later, on the back step of the command trailer, he brought her coffee she hadn't asked for, because he still remembered she forgot to eat when she was worried. They talked in the careful, wounded way of 2 people circling a wound neither wanted to reopen. He told her he'd looked for her the first year. She told him she'd known, her old landlord had mentioned it, but she'd never called back, because every time she imagined seeing him again, she remembered the last thing he'd said to her the day they ended. "I'm sorry," he told her, "for believing someone else instead of believing you." She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't even know everything you should be sorry for." A radio call pulled her away before he could ask what she meant. The next morning, the wind changed. Flames raced toward a temporary workers' camp, and Jonah guided the truck around a washed-out fork that existed on no current map, because he'd walked that mountain for 3 years before construction ever began. Every worker made it out, and on the drive back, they laughed together for the first time in a decade over something as small as bad coffee. The silence afterward felt different, less like grief, more like memory. That night, a flash flood sealed every road off the mountain, and the only shelter left was a one-room ranger station with 2 narrow cots. Rain hammered the roof while they sat across from each other in lantern light, 10 years of unfinished history filling the space between them more completely than the small room ever could. Jonah pulled a small, folded piece of velvet from his wallet, the engagement ring he'd never thrown away. Clara reached beneath her collar and drew out a chain. Her ring hung from it, hidden but never removed. "I kept it," she said quietly, "because it reminded me that once there was a man who believed I deserved to be loved. I became someone else," he said. "Yes, I hate that man. So do I." Neither said anything else that night, but something had shifted, quietly, in the dark. Neither of them knew that by morning, a bright, curious 10-year-old girl would walk into that little station and change both of their lives forever. Pounding woke Clara before dawn. A school bus rerouted around a flooded bridge, stalled with the water rising, 26 children trapped inside. Clara and Jonah went in on foot. When they reached the bus, a small voice called out from the doorway, "Aunt Clara!" A dark-haired, gray-eyed 10-year-old named Maya pushed through the other children and ran straight into Clara's arms. Jonah watched Clara become someone entirely different in front of this child. Softer, warmer, unguarded in a way he'd never seen, not even with him. "Who's that?" Maya asked. "This is Jonah Mercer," Clara said, her voice tightening. "The architect? You designed the Glass Harbor Library. I drew it last year," Maya said, and Jonah felt something shift in his chest he couldn't yet name. The rescue continued through mud and rising water, Jonah carrying children across one by one, while Maya trailed beside him, cataloging every detail about this stranger with the sharp attention only a child can manage. One frightened boy refused to let go of the door frame, insisting he couldn't swim, and Jonah crouched to his level and told him that was fine, because the bus couldn't swim either, and he'd be doing the carrying instead. When the roadbed gave way and the bus rolled onto its side, Jonah caught Clara as the ground collapsed beneath her, holding her upright a second too long, her hand still gripping his jacket. Back at the ranger station, Maya showed Jonah her sketchbook, houses with underground shelters, fire-safe walls. He corrected a vent. She corrected a line on his own famous library. They built a supply box tower together, while Clara watched through the window, seeing in her daughter's furrowed brow and stubborn tilt of the head an echo she had spent 10 years trying not to notice. When Anna, Maya's aunt, arrived to collect her, her expression turned cold at the sight of Jonah. "You have no idea what she went through," she told him, and Clara stepped between them before anything more could be said. Alone with Clara afterward, Jonah asked how long she'd been raising Maya on her own. Her walls came up instantly. "You don't get to ask that." But he only told her, quietly, that she'd done a good job. It hurt more than anger would have. Over the following days, work kept throwing them together. Maps, evacuation routes, arguments that dissolved into something gentler. Their hands brushed over a ruler, and neither pulled away first. Jonah admitted he might have spent 16 years letting the wrong man speak for him. The man who'd signed off on reports he never verified, who had chosen to believe someone else over Clara. She touched his sleeve. He covered her hand with his, For a moment, 10 years disappeared. Maya kept finding her way back to the command post with her sketchbook, and Jonah kept showing up to really look at her drawings. Clara watched them lean over the same page, noticing the same crease between their brows, and understood not what Maya had been protected from, but what she had been denied. Then, at 2 a.m, the wind turned again, boxing in Pine Creek's shelter, nearly 200 people, Maya among them, behind fire on every side but an old, unused pedestrian bridge across Cedar Gorge. Jonah had inspected its anchors years earlier. Clara trusted him enough, finally, to use it. The crossing was underway in careful groups when a propane tank exploded and the crowd surged. A cable snapped. The decking gave way beneath Maya's feet, and she caught the edge with both hands, screaming over the gorge. Clara heard it, and everything inside her stopped cold. Jonah ran across the failing bridge and caught her wrist as it splintered beneath him, Clara throwing her weight behind him to keep them both from going over. "Trust me," he told her. The same words from the washed-out road, except this time it was their daughter hanging in the dark. "On 3, he said, and Clara held him tighter as flames reached the edge of the school grounds behind them. Together, they pulled Maya back onto solid decking seconds before the bridge collapsed entirely into the gorge. For one impossible moment, the three of them held each other, a family that had never known it was one, remembering its shape all at once. At the hospital, doctors found a congenital abnormality in Maya's lung, hidden until the smoke exposure revealed it. They needed a full family history from both biological parents. Clara looked at Jonah and said the only thing left to say, "He's standing right here." Jonah asked her to say it again, and when she did, "Maya is your daughter," something in him broke open completely. He gave blood, signed every form, and asked only one thing: tell him what his daughter needed. Later, the weight of it caught up to him. He had missed her first word, her first step, every birthday. Clara explained she'd been protecting Maya from Victor Hale, the man who ran Jonah's company and who, a decade earlier, had convinced Jonah that Clara couldn't be trusted. Jonah didn't argue. He only asked when Maya would be told and agreed to wait until she was stable. He kept his word in every ordinary way that mattered: pancakes, coffee, a fresh sketchbook, pencils deliberately snapped in half so she wouldn't be afraid to use them. Every morning he showed up, and every day the distance between the three of them shrank a little further, not because anyone forced it, but because they kept discovering, one small habit at a time, things that had always belonged to all three of them: stubbornness, terrible jokes, the same tilt of the head when they concentrated. One evening, sitting outside the hospital on a bench beneath the maple trees, Jonah finally asked Clara the question that had waited between them since the ranger station: whether any part of her still loved him. She could have lied. She had spent years becoming good at silence. But too much had already burned to keep lying now. "That was never the problem," she told him. "I stopped loving the man who chose not to believe me. But I never stopped loving the man before that." He asked her to let him become someone better. She warned him he didn't get to make promises out of fear. "I'm not afraid," he said. "I'm terrified, but not of loving you." She walked away without answering, but she never once told him no. When Maya woke after her treatment and noticed her parents holding hands, she finally learned the truth. "Do you want to be my father?" she asked. "I already am," Jonah said. "For how long?" For as long as you let me. You can start tomorrow, Maya told him, and he laughed through tears and said he'd start right now. The evidence against Victor Hale moved fast once it started. Forged assessments, a hidden phase of illegal development. Jonah confronted him one last time in the boardroom that had once belonged to them both, laid the files on the table, and resigned. I am a man who missed the first 10 years of his daughter's life because I trusted you, he said. I'm choosing them now. Victor was arrested 3 days later, and the story dominated the news for weeks. Jonah canceled the Aspen Crest development, transferred the land into a permanent conservation trust, and funded fire-resistant housing and evacuation infrastructure for the very communities the fire had nearly destroyed. Then he sold his shares and walked away from the company that still carried his own name. Months later, Jonah attended Maya's first parent-teacher conference, arriving 20 minutes early with 3 pages of questions. Because, he told Clara, he liked to be prepared and had heard Maya talked during mathematics. Clara laughed at that, a real laugh, because she had begun laughing around him again, not often, but often enough to notice. Afterward, walking through the school courtyard he'd once designed, they stopped beside the mural wall where they'd first met, back when he was a young architect criticizing the structural impossibility of a painted tree, and she was an art teacher insisting it was symbolic rather than dangerous. He handed her plans for a new project, fire-resistant homes credited to Jonah Mercer, with Clara Bennett and Maya Bennett listed as lead critic. He asked her to advise it as the person who saw danger before anyone else did. She said she'd think about it. He told her that used to mean yes. She reminded him that so had a lot of things once. Spring came slowly to Black Ridge. Green shoots pushed through blackened earth as volunteers planted new trees where the resort's entrance had once been staked out. Maya pointed to a marked circle in the dirt. "Dad, put it there," she said, the word landing on Jonah so naturally she didn't even notice she'd used it for the first time. He turned away for a moment, blinking hard, before carrying the sapling exactly where he'd been told. Later, alone with Clara, Jonah said he didn't deserve another chance. She agreed. He accepted it, then added that if life offered one anyway, he'd spend every day earning it. She warned him there would still be days she remembered everything and hated him for it. He said he knew. She told him he couldn't fix 10 lost years. He agreed and said only that he could show up for the next 10 and the 10 after that if she let him. She looked at the man in front of her, not the young architect she'd once loved without hesitation, but someone reshaped by loss, who had carried their daughter off a collapsing bridge and stayed when staying offered him nothing in return. She touched his face. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "I know that doesn't make everything all right," he said. "No," she agreed, "but it makes this possible." She kissed him, not the easy, certain kiss of two people who once believed the world would bend around their plans, but something slower, built from grief and patience and the choice to trust what had actually been earned. Maya caught the whole thing on her phone from the overlook, grinning, refusing to hand it over. Below them, the mountains stretched wide beneath the afternoon sun, blackened trunks still standing among fresh green growth, scars that would never fully disappear, and between all of it, new life already taking root. Maya slipped one hand into her mother's and the other into her father's, and asked whether this was where their story finally started. "No," Jonah told her. "This is where we stop letting the past write the ending." They stood there together as the wind moved through the new saplings, three people who had lost years, lost trust, and very nearly lost the chance to become a family at all, and who had found their way back not because the past was forgotten, but because it was finally fully faced, because an apology had eventually become action instead of just words, because a father kept showing up long after showing up stopped being easy, because a mother finally found the courage to lower the walls she had built to keep herself safe. The mountain would carry the marks of that fire for generations. But every spring after, the three of them came back together to plant one more tree, not to erase what had burned, but to remember, always, exactly what they had chosen to rebuild in its place. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more emotional drama recaps with unforgettable twists, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tell us your favorite moment in the comments below.